I'm just going to do a quick video. This is mostly for new players, talking about the Warpgate base, kind of what it is, being Warpgated, what that means, and just kind of brushing over some stuff that's kind of important. So, being Warpgated is kind of bad for your faction, if you don't already know that. Again, being Warpgated, I mean, obviously everything's linked on the map. So I'll talk more about that in a sec, but yeah, it's a bad thing to happen to your faction. So, you know, again, try and defend the Warpgate. If you are a faction leader, if you are an outfit leader, or you're commanding a squad, try and get your squad to defend the Warpgate. It's kind of important. But anyway, so for newer players, this is a Warpgate. This is where you spawn. Now the Warpgate has a giant shield around it. It's not... the enemy can't get in here. You can shoot out, but the enemy can't shoot in. Now, the enemy can't get too close to the Warpgate because they would automatically end up dying. They'll just suicide themselves, basically. But yeah, the enemy can't come in here and start shooting up the place. It's not going to happen. They can't come in your Warpgate. Now, these are Warpgate bases. When a faction gets Warpgated, these are the bases that get taken generally. So if somebody comments in faction chat with Warpgated, this is what they mean. Like, these bases are getting taken. Now, these are all linked together. But talking about lattice links, so for example, Waterson's here, Camp Waterson's. If the enemy took Camp Waterson's and then took storage, you would need to take storage back in order to take Camp Waterson's. Here, for example, if the enemy took storage and then took firing range, you could still take storage back because it's linked to the Warpgate base. So there's links here all over the place. Now the enemy can't capture the Warpgate base. I've had people over the years ask me that. Like, oh, is that like the last base they need to take? They can only take the Warpgate bases. They can't take the Warpgate. It's not going to happen. Now, generally, what you do to prevent your Warpgate from being taken is by massing up an army and pushing to one of these bases. Now, this is usually with tanks and Sunderers normally. But yeah, so as you can see, there's 3 bases. When you get those 3 bases taken, it's called the Warpgate base. And yeah, so I'm just going to brush over the pros and cons. Now, I would say there's more cons really than pros. The pros, I'll talk about the pros first since there isn't many. The pro is that there's plenty of farm. If the enemy comes to your Warpgate, pulling a tank and going around shooting some people is always going to net you a few kills. And generally, farm is plenty because they're at your Warpgate, which obviously isn't far before you can start engaging in the enemy. You literally drive out your Warpgate and start shooting at enemy, which is nice. Now, that's the only pro I see. Maybe on PC they might do it strategically to cut off a bunch of bases. We've never Warpgated a faction intentionally. The only time we Warpgated a faction was when Assassino was basically talking smack in Yell chat, and we decided to Warpgate him for no reason. But generally, Warpgating is a bad thing because it makes people log out. So let me give you an example. So one day we came on, we had this Warpgate down here as NC. The VS, now this is 6 in the morning. I came on at 4 in the morning and a lot of the VS sweats was on. And for some reason, the VS pushed to our Warpgate. They took this base and this base, and then they kept us there at 6 in the morning and wouldn't let us get a spawn down. Now, you could say, well, that's the game. You know, the game allows you to do that, so, you know, you should have an army to fight back and, you know, get your own army or whatever. You know, the VS were on that day and they were making it hard. But the point of the matter is that people aren't going to sit in Warpgate for however long. They get bored and they're just going to log off. Then that particular faction ends up with 10 guys online, then it ends up being 5 guys online, and then they realise that 5 guys aren't going to cut it, so they end up being 2 guys because 3 log off. Do you know what I mean? And then it ends up with being no guys online and people just log off. Sometimes you can't help but warpgate a faction. Sometimes you can help it by not warpgating, say your squad lead or platoon lead. Don't feel the need to push to their warpgate. Now, in the past, I've seen it in the past where people on NC, like outfit leaders and squad leads, have been like, hey, we're going to warpgate TR today. For no reason. Now, this is bad because number one, it makes people log out. And number two, it just makes you look bad as a squad lead. Why would you want to warpgate a faction? I'm sure, 6 years ago when PlanetSide was in its peak, I'm sure warpgating a faction wasn't a bad idea because I'm sure the fights were plentiful. But currently there's only one fight on the map, and if you're warpgating a faction and making that faction log off, then it ends up being, boring for that faction. They log off, and then the other faction is left kind of twiddling its thumbs while you fight at the warpgate. Ideally, what you should be doing is trying to create a fight in the middle so that each faction can get something going. Like, farm in the middle is always good. Everybody appreciates the farm in the middle. If you're at their warpgate and you're making them log off at 6 in the morning, then what's the other faction going to do? The other faction's kind of just sat in the middle doing nothing. I've seen this plenty of times. So, I'm not going to go too much into it, but that's generally my take on it. Warpgating a faction. I've seen squad leads warpgate a faction. I've seen them go all out and try and warpgate a faction. Now, here, for example, this particular base. So this is a good example of a warpgate base, and how poor design makes it so that you can't take the warpgate base back. So here, for example, right, their spawn room is here. Their friggin' warpgate is here. So you bring a tank here, and you've got some Max or some dude with lock-ons shooting at your Sunday before you've even had a chance to get it to the base. If you're warpgated at this particular base, it can be very hard to push out. And it gets to the stage where you're just bringing tanks non-stop out the warpgate to try and attack this base. And you're really getting nowhere because they're in spawn and you can't even kill them. It's like, why? Not only to that, right, you bring air and they're locking on from like the hills. They all jump in the hills, they start using lock-ons, and they just shoot you down. And it gets to a stage where you're just bored. So you log out. Now, this particular base as well is pretty bad. Some warpgate bases are just terrible. Now, I came on at 6 in the morning once, and we were fighting here in this exact spot. We couldn't get a Sunday down here because they were pulling non-stop tanks to kill our Sundays. They had tanks up here, and they had people on the ridge at 6 in the morning firing lock-ons at you as you're trying to get out. I put a spawn down here. I've got some dude, now I'm not going to name his name, but he was sweating so hard to kill this fucking Sunday. He was pulling tanks. He was pulling mag riders from this base, bringing them down and trying to kill the Sunday. Right, we ended up killing him in his tank. Then 2 seconds later, bro, he's pulling air from this base. He's coming over and he's sweating so hard. He gets the Sunday low enough to jump out and see for it at 6 in the morning. This is what I mean. Like, if you're an outfit lead or squad lead or just anybody who's just fighting at the warpgate, don't feel the need to go and destroy the Sunday, especially at 6 in the morning. Now, there has been times when NC have warpgated factions as well. I'm not saying NC is the perfect, example of not killing the spawns. We've killed the spawns more than probably anyone on this thing. But if you are, NC, squad lead, or whoever you are, then think logically about it. You're trying to create fights on the map. The developers don't do a good, they don't make it, so that you can defend your warpgate very well sometimes. Sometimes you'll get warpgated and sometimes you can't get out of warpgate. in you know, and you wonder why the pop gets even lower because people warpgate. Kind of annoying. I've been on where NC squad leads have gone for a certain faction and kept them warpgated for hours. And I'm sitting there like, why? Why are we doing this? Doesn't make sense. But some squad leads will do that. Now, defensive warpgate. If you're a faction, if you have an outfit on a faction, feel free to go to that outfit. Feel free to get your outfit and defend the warpgate. Like, we've had it before, right? So, we was on indoor once, and we got pushed by a certain TR outfit to our warpgate. So it was down here at this base. Now I think there's a 3-point base here. We actually managed to take the 3-point base back, and we took it back via overpop. Now we had one of their outfit leaders telling me that, oh, we were trying to create a good fight, and you're absolutely shitting on us with overpop. If you're trying to create a good fight, don't create it at the warpgate, because you're going to end up with half of NC coming and defending a warpgate. You're not going to get a good fight at the warpgate unless you're destroying our Sundays, which in that then you're not going to get a fight at the warpgate. So what we did, we grabbed a bunch of tanks, we grabbed a bunch of Sundays, and we absolutely zerged this base, because it's a ship base to fight at. You're trying to take 3 points, and they're just pulling air and tanks all the time at your warp gate, and you're struggling. You get a Sunday down at like A, for example, they come over with a tank and start shooting it. So yeah, just to clarify, getting, you know, pushing to the warp gate, you know, you might say, oh well, NC pushed to our warp gate, you know, last week, and they warp gated us for 5 hours. And now we must do the same, you know. So they keep NC warp gated for 5 hours, you know, and then whatever it is. At the end of the day, you're trying to create a fight in the middle. Now, as you can see right now, this is why I'm doing this video. We're pushing at each faction's kind of warp gate, because NC has quite high pop. Now, with that said, you know, the alert's on, so it is what it is. But for something like 6 in the morning, or maybe like it's Wednesday night, right? There's not much going on the map. So, hey, let's push the enemy's warp gate. Just try and get a fight in the middle. Please. That's all I'm saying. Don't feel the need to warp gate the faction just for the hell of it. Maybe on PC they have a different opinion on this. Maybe they warp gate and it's like fine to do that. But I feel like on series it can be kind of shitty. Now we have warp gated in the past, and I'm not saying that we're perfect. We've done it. We've done it for reasons like to piss off Assassino. But generally, yeah. As N151, we try and leave the warp gate. We try and leave it. We don't really warp gate. Now you might get the odd member at the warp gate, like N151 member, who doesn't follow waypoints, and he's stood there at the warp gate. Maybe he's new to the game and he doesn't understand. In any case, you know, try and stay away from the warp gate. So I'm going to leave it there now. I think I've said what I've got to say. Any questions, feel free to pop it down in the comments. If you play PC, please give your opinion on it in the comments. You know, I'd like to hear it. But this is PS4 console. I mean, the pop's been pretty good over the holidays, so hopefully, you know, hopefully when Osher comes out, it'll be a lot better. But anyway, so I'm going to leave it there, guys. Any questions, pop it in the comments. If you're new to the game, welcome, and I'll see you on Series server. See you later, guys. Take care.